Okay, so let me reset this. I'm going to have this go for 10 minutes here. Okay, so right now we are wiring up all of our cells, and what we're going to do next is we're going to create this step function. So we're going to do it a little bit at a time here. One thing we could do here is that in order to wire this up, let's take a look and see, we've got this step button. So what I'm going to do here is that when we set up our board, I'm going to say document get element by ID step button. And I like to make sure that I was able to find the element. So I'm going to say style.display equals none. I'll go back here and rerun this. And I've actually got that incorrect. It's probably called button step. Step btn. Looks right. Oh, let's try to figure that out. Here's our button, step.btn. See if we see anything here. We want to make sure if we're wiring up a button, find the button we want to wire up. Reload this. So we've got null here. That's a little bit strange. Let's try to figure out why. Let's try one of these other guys. Control panel. A little strange here. That's our function, get element by ID. Sure looks like the ID is step button. We know that we're wiring up drawing our table. So we know that we've got a board, which is here. We should have a step button. I'm sure I'm doing something incorrectly. I'm sure I'm doing an underscore instead of a step underscore btn. Okay, I think I'm probably doing a dash. So if I'm able to find that button, what I want to do is call step whenever I hit that button. So I'm going to go over here and set an event handler. And this is going to be click, and this is going to be this dot step. But there's a little bit of a problem when I get in here because I want to iterate over things. If I do console.log, this dot for each cell, find that this is going to be undefined. And this is not click, this is going to be on click. Right, and that's undefined. The reason why that's undefined is that when you end up adding an event handler to something on the DOM, you don't control how it ends up getting called back. You're just saying, hey, look, call me back with this function when this event occurs. And the way that the DOM event handlers are set up by default, the context in which they are called is, in fact, to give you the element that was clicked on, which is perfectly reasonable. But what we want to do is we actually want to bind to our object that we have here. And if I do that, I can see that this is still undefined. Let's see. And here I end up seeing that I get my for each. So what I want to do here is I want to loop over each of my cells. So I'm going to say this for each cell. And just as a starting point, say console.log cell. These are all the cells that I have. Let's make things a little bit interesting. These were some of these utility methods that I told you about. So what about if we say cell, we call a method, this is alive cell, and we want it to return true if this is alive. Now, if we ran this now, let's actually be clear about this, right? This is going to give us an error because that method doesn't exist. All right, so this is alive is not a function. And we'll go over here. One thing we could do, if we just want to sort of show that this is not a method to be called outside of this object, we could put an underscore in front of it. Well, it's probably not critical here. Let's keep our utility methods here. We'll say is alive. How do we know if a cell is alive? Well, cell is alive if its class name is alive. So we're going to return, put a cell here. And we'll say return cell class name equals alive. Let's just see if that works. So when we step, we still see this alive is not a function. Let's make sure we're reloading here. Still nothing. Just make sure that we have our context right. It should be right within here. That's interesting. So, yeah, this was something that was mentioned before. So we've got our cell in here. We're binding to this. Let me try something here. Now we know when we end up getting into another trick to handle this. We step here, we see that here we have our object, and inside this for each we don't. That's interesting. I didn't really expect to see that. Here's our iterator function, get element by ID, and we're calling that function. You know, I guess because it's just a standalone function, we've just lost our context here. I mean, one thing we could do here is that if we wanted to make sure that this iterator function got called in the context of this, we should be able to say bind this. And now if I run this, I should see, let's be clear, not bind. Let's say either call or apply. Well, let's actually do it the right way here. Here's our iterator function. A couple of different ways that you could do this. I'm trying to avoid a situation where we end up doing something like that is equal to this. So I'm going to say iterator function dot bind dot call this. Let's just see if that will work. Yeah, so that's going to preserve my, and again, the problem here is when you pass in this iterator function, it just sees it as a function. So when it ends up calling it, it's not calling it in the right context, which is actually was a little bit of a surprise just now. So now at this point, we can actually find out whether or not our cell is alive. So out of all these cells, let's do this one more time. So yeah, I only have one cell that's alive. I clear this, I should see that I have 3 cells that are alive. That works. Now, let's do something a little bit different here. Instead of just finding out if it's alive, okay, let's take a break. Let me publish up this video.